Hi, welcome. I'm here with Lisa K. Solomon, author, futurist, and educator at the Stanford D.school. Lisa K., how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday is right. And I'm so excited for what you have to share today because we're talking about the future. And I love that you're talking about the futures and making it timely relevant to what's going on for you personally, as well as what's going on for your organization. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to disappear for a bit, and then you're going to jump into what you do, and then we'll have a little chat about it. That sound good?
That sounds great to me. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Well, likewise, Lisa. Again, thank you. And here we go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm thrilled to be sharing what gets me up every day, which is to help more learners and leaders embrace agency to lead like a futurist. And I want to say off the bat, I'm not saying that you need to have a crystal ball or tarot cards or any kind of prediction machine. What I am saying is that I believe all of us, particularly in times of increasing change and complexity, can learn skills, practices, approaches that allow us to see a wider range of futures, plural, how they may play out, and to design opportunities to bring about the future that we'd like to see, essentially flexing our agency. And I'll just give you a little bit of a glimpse of the kinds of things I teach at the Stanford D.school and some of the things that I will be talking about this coming June with a number of leaders and HR professionals and talent managers to help all of us prepare for how the future might unfold. So, at a high level, when we think about these big words, futures and design, I'm thinking about helping more leaders understand how the world might change and why. So, really flexing that anticipatory set of muscles to say all of these things are happening now. How might they play out? To sort of rehearse and to better understand the trajectories, and also to use our imagination to take what's in plain sight and say, I wonder if this could mean X, Y, or Z, even if that feels a little uncomfortable. And then once we take a look at those varying futures, we might then say, well, how might practices of design inform positive choices? Things that might create value for others. And even if we don't exactly know that they are going to be the right choices, the ability to move ideas forward to get feedback is in and of itself a futures move. So I'm really excited to talk to everyone about that. Look, fundamentally, I don't need to tell anybody here, we are living in an age of increased ambiguity and complexity. This is work that I've been studying for over 20 years, and I have great empathy for leaders that find themselves in positions where they are expected to be masters at ways of navigating this world that they've never had practice doing. I mean, that's kind of crazy if you think about it, right? I wasn't born learning how to create a great PowerPoint presentation or an Excel spreadsheet to figure out a discounted cash flow model. I had to practice that. And yet we expect leaders every day to get up, being ready to handle the just incredible amounts of complexity and change of these novel, intertwined, high stakes strategic issues that they've never had practice in. So, what we're trying to do is give them space to do that, give them a conceptual vocabulary, encourage them to build on what they're already doing well in order to bring about a better future. Look, it can feel like my dear colleague Scott Dorley, who's the creative director of the D School and the co-author of an incredible new book called Assembling Tomorrow. What he says is it is so hard to lead in a moment when we never feel up to speed. Right? Like maybe some of you can appreciate that. I certainly appreciate that. Every day there's a new technology advancement, a new application. Just today, there was an extraordinary breakthrough of how CRISPR and gene editing is now being able to solve some of our health challenges that like we've never seen before. So even on the good side, it can feel like we're never up to speed. Scott says it's nuts, right? Never up to speed. Like, How do we operate in a world where we're constantly feeling like we are behind the eight ball? We know as humans that ignites our flight or fright response, right? Our amygdala hijack is going off all of the time. Not necessarily great for generative, creative thinking. As he says, like, we're just not wired for this. Our nervous systems are nervous, as Scott says. So we just need to name the fact that we have to give ourselves a little grace and perhaps open up our aperture for the new kinds of skills and approaches we can bring into our work. I love this quote by my colleague Grant McCracken, who's a cultural anthropologist who about 15 years ago wrote a very powerful article in the Harvard Business Review, where he says the future is at odds with the corporation. And what he meant by that is that the corporation loves to reduce variance, to hit its marks, to create strategic plans, to have things like OKRs and KPIs that kind of lull us into thinking that the future can be planned and predicted. And what he says in this article, in just plain language, is that the future does not care about your plans. The future is filled with speed and surprise and doesn't really have an obligation to help you meet your milestones. Said another way, if we think about how the future is unfolding in different ways and why it feels like we are so in a pace of accelerated change, I love showing this chart from Thomas Friedman's book, 2016 best-selling book, Thank You for Being Late, in which the opening chapter, he talks about in a conversation with Astro Teller, who is the founder of Google X Moonshots, that exponential text, digital text was on this exponential curve thanks to Moore's law and how the increase of compute processing and access to data is making digital technology faster and faster. And yet we as humans adapt much more slowly, much more on a linear path. So this was super instructive to leaders trying to understand how to really anticipate and even imagine how technologies were going to change and to start to prepare for the gap between how technologies are going to change and what happens in our organizations that are still tend to be run by humans. The thing about this chart is that this was 9 years ago. So here's my adaptation of thinking about where we are right now with the convergence of technology and tools, with generative AI and language learning models, getting faster and stronger by the day, tools now begetting tools, coding now doing their own coding. And at the same time, we have other external forces in just in context that is actually, I think, sloping our adaptability down. Right? Misinformation, censorship, business models that siphon off our attention span, governance, even the fracturing of our geopolitical stability, this does not help adaptability. So this is really the widening gap here that we have to pay attention to, particularly as HR leaders, as talent managers. What are we doing to navigate this contextual change that's on full display at this moment? This is just one example of the kind of headlines I've been asked to speak a lot lately with higher ed leaders that are just a microcosm of some of the real seismic shifts that are happening in our world right now. Like, again, we're not wired to handle all this adaptive change on full display. So, how do we help corporations that are used to managing the future in this way that neatly folds into spreadsheets and charts that make us feel like we can control the future when in fact the future looks like this? So that's a big part of what I do in my work, in my classes, the help I provide leaders, ultimately helping them learn skills that allow them to see a wider set of futures, that allow them to shape futures in more concrete ways that take into consideration systems and levers of power, and also teach them how to share the preferred futures that they want to bring to life in ways that others can get behind. So it's not such a lonely, scary path. So I'll stop right there for now because that was a lot to take in on a Friday morning, and I'm sure there's a lot we can pick up on. But really, Let's see where that conversation goes.
Lisa, thank you so much for your energy, your ideas. And I want to pick up on a handful of things in there. Forgive me for not remembering the exact words that you used, but it give leaders the language to actually talk about the future. I reference a Chinese proverb: "The beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names."
Mm.
So, yeah, it's like we're talking past each other a lot within organizations and in our personal lives. So, how important do you believe it is to actually have a mental model and common language to explore effectively in an organization?
Such a great opening question. It's foundational. Like one of the reasons why we're having trouble aligning on it is that if we think about our schooling, that might allow us to talk about the future in aligned ways or in nuanced ways or complex ways. I often ask leaders this question. I would say, how many people here have taken a class in history? Everybody raises their hands, right? That's non-negotiable. We understand, we take history because history helps us understand how we got to this moment, and it also gives us frame for historical thinking and contextual thinking and pattern recognition. I then will say to executives, okay, well, how many people have actually taken a class on futures? Zero.
Mm.
Zero. And they say, okay, well, one third question, which is, well, which one of those can we influence? They're like, "Oh, yeah." So I share that because it's not just even about how we talk about the futures, it's the foundational practice of understanding things like what we mean when we say the word futures, right? How do we think about where futures show up, either implicitly or explicitly in our organizations, right? I would say every leader is a futurist if you have created a strategic plan, a presentation for a new product idea, a competitive landscape of how you are competing currently and how that might shift, but we don't call it that, right? We have these other words and languages. So we need to sort of help more leaders say explicitly uh, um, what nerdy futurists would call their official future, how they think the world is going to unfold and why, to make sure that we're then setting the table to unpack assumptions about why we believe that to be true. And if we don't slow down and have those kinds of conversations and bring in different perspectives to understand a fuller picture of what's happening in the contextual world, in the macro world, then we're all operating under these different perceptions and these different, as again, what futurists might call it, images of the future, right?
Mm.
So if you're a leader and you have an optimistic view of the future, you're like, let's go, 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 let's make it happen. And you're filled with all this hope and possibility because you're seeing the world one way. And yet a product manager under you is seeing all the risks and all the bugs and how the technology isn't there yet. They have a very different view of the future. That opens up a gap if we're not having explicit conversations about it.
Oh gosh, I just so celebrate what you're bringing to the world. I'll just say that right now. So with there's two things that are jumping to mind, and I got to pick one because that's how we have to, operate. One is mindset. So we all have our structures of interpretation, our neurobiology, our mental mapping, and that creates bias, but also creates this opportunity. So what I'm hearing you say is getting alignment from a diverse group. It could be a cross-functional group to actually think about the future, not necessarily in the same way, but in an aligned way. Number one, actually, I am going to pack this question in, is it's one thing to kind of get that alignment, but it's also, you said, slow down and create the space to actually generate this alignment. Can you speak to how that looks, like to actually get a team together and explore?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Easier said than done, right?
Mhm.
I'll give you two examples of how this sort of ideas of thinking about mindset and getting leaders and teams to slow down a little bit, which feels antithetical when it's like the urgency is so real for people. And let's face it, like we have all these amazing technologies that are incentivized to slice off our attention, to actually interfere with slower work. But the core actually makes me think about a book that I co-authored about 10 years ago called Moments of Impact: How to Design Strategic Conversations to Accelerate Change. And what we say in that book is that the ability to design conversations, I'm not talking about presentations, I'm not talking about monologues, I'm not talking about plans, I'm talking about conversations that foster discovery and learning across different perspectives in order to inform new ideas about how the future might unfold and strategic choices you might make. We talk The whole book is really zeroing in on helping leaders think differently about the most valuable asset they have with their senior leadership team and others involved in their ecosystem, which is to bring them in to learn together. And we say this is the most valuable skill you've never been taught. I mean, again, many of us have been taught how to run a great meeting. Oh, yeah. And I have asked hundreds of leaders, what makes for a great meeting? What do you think I hear, Al?
Set the agenda, set the table, something like that.
Yeah,
Action steps, all that.
exactly. Set the agenda. Let's get to next steps or action, end on time, right? So let's say you get to next steps, but not everybody's aligned on why those next steps matter. Maybe this is bringing up some PTSD for some folks. What was that time worthwhile? So again, we have another chapter talking about really defining your purpose, and particularly when it comes to these wicked problems or adaptive problems that Ron Heifetz coined many years ago. We want to jump to options and solve them. We're like walking solving machines. We feel a little hit of dopamine. We're like, yeah, we got to somewhere. But that slowing down part is actually building understanding. Do we understand this? And that's why bringing in multiple perspectives is so important, because the where you sit is where you stand. If you're a product person, you're going to look at it from a product standpoint. If you're a market person, you're going to look at it from a marketing standpoint. If you're a technology person, you're looking at it from a technology. If you're, most importantly, the person that is going to benefit from the thing that you're creating, are you bringing them in? And are you socializing those different perspectives to try to understand what is really necessary as the world changes? So I get very optimistic because I think these things can be teachable, that can be taught and can be learned. And the book is really one sort of starter kit to help all leaders use the things that we have already built into our annual cycles: board meetings, offsites, strategy sessions with your leadership team, and really equips them to be more future focused in productive ways.
Why do you believe this isn't more widespread and common?
Yeah, it's another great question. We have another chapter in the book. I think it's one of my favorites. I love all the chapters. Maybe I love this one a little bit more. It's at the end of the book, after we really go through 5 key principles with like detailed cases and also prompts. Do this, try this, experiment, read this. And the back, we have a chapter called Overcoming the Yeah Buts, as in, yeah, but that would never happen here.
Mm.
And we know the great Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Like how people do things is a very, very powerful. The status quo is very powerful. And in the Overcoming the Yeah Buts chapter, we talk about 3 patterns that tends to be prevalent in most organizations. Again, not anyone's individual fault, but just naming them helps us then come up with new strategies to try to change them. So the first one gets to a little bit what I shared in my opening, this near-termism, right? This like we are so focused on delivering annual results, quarterly results. How did you do on your metric? And those are important because we need guideposts to understand, if we're making progress, but they shouldn't be the only way we understand how we are learning and growing, because often they're stuck in the past, right? They were a past idea of an indicator that we're trying to deliver on in the present. So there has to be some fluidity to them, but they also keep us often overgrounded in the past, right? Because we're anchoring. And then when something comes into play that interferes with that, like, I don't know, the future, we end up defending, right, what we've done. So this near termism is very, very prevalent. Again, not to mention all the like attention siphoning that we're battling right now. The second, which I think is really at the heart of your question, is like we've never really been taught how to do it. So
Mhm.
again, we're expected to have this magical capability to design conversations when we've never been practiced. We're not, I don't see classes on designing strategic conversations and how to do it. I see facilitation, but facilitations suggest you're already in the room.
Mhm.
Like, this is like, what are the decisions I'm gonna make ahead of time, right? How am I gonna organize the room? Who am I gonna invite? How am I gonna frame the issue? So we've never been taught how to do it. And the last one, which again, I think a lot of leaders might be able to relate to, is this idea that within any organization, even productive cultures, there's this internal protecting of resources, right? Like my team, my budget. When we have a conversation that suggests we might have to take a different path, that usually means change or something has to alter. And we get very protective of what we have and what we know. Is sort of the kind of over political sphere. And I don't mean what's happening in our government right now. I mean like, hey, I'm very protective of my turf. So
Mhm.
these three yeah buts, near-termism, capability gaps, politics gets in the way of what we believe and what I believe can be a more adaptive and strengthening culture. The ability of leaders to take a future stance, to have a longer lens on something that really can galvanize the organization, the ability to create incentives for learning that really helps others rise and learn together, this sort of enabling environment, and that the idea of grounding it in a common purpose. And this is where I think when leaders do a good job of articulating their values and what their organization stands for, that they're really in a better position to withstand some of the complexity that's coming at us.
Gosh, I so look forward to being in the room with you next month and going deeper on this. I have a few more questions, and if you're listening in and watching, by all means, ask your question via the comments on LinkedIn or elsewhere, and we'll do our best to get to them. No promises on getting to all of them. Uh, I want to step back and just think about an individual change agent. So, for example, next month at Snowbird, Utah, where we'll be, there's going to be a host of individuals representing larger organizations, and they're going to go back and they might not have the cachet to say, all right, everyone, we're going to get together and design this conversation. How do change agents influence and build energy so these conversations do in fact happen?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think obviously everyone is going to be on their own individual journey depending on the culture and what's happening within their organization. What I'm so excited about for next week is to be in the room, with dedicated people leaders, that probably get up every day thinking, how do I help empower the people I work with to do their best work amid these changing conditions? And so, first of all, we're going to be fostering a lot of learning among each other, right? To be able to share notes, both challenges and bright spots. And we're going to do that in the context of the great work that Red Thread Research is doing around these macro trends that they've all already identified. I love working with Danny and Stacia because they are really looking at what's happening in the world and its impact on HR leaders and people managers and talent amplifiers in ways that's not biased by any one technology. It's very easy to have, like, again, sort of your earlier question of mindset and worldview. It's very easy to get to fall in love with your own technology and to think like, oh no, this is going to change the world, right? Danny and Stacia are really trying to set the stage and giving me and my colleague Jeff Rogers an opportunity to have a futures conversation with all of these leaders about their roles, about how work is changing in a way that both grounds them in their individual context and also maximizes learning opportunities. And so we are very much applying what I said earlier. This is very much a designed experience. This is not going to be sit and get. We are going to be offering some opportunities to visit the future in order to facilitate and even prompt new questions and learning from each other. So we say, we're excited for a 3-2-1 model, right? We want everyone to walk away with 3 new relationships, learning relationships that they can kind of like call and come back to. We want them to walk away with, maybe sort of two ideas or things that they're ready to research more, and one thing that they're ready to try. And that ready to try piece is, again, just going to be different. For some, it might be like, wow, I really need to intentionally bring the future to our organization in the form of new materials or new learning series or new relationships with people on the edge. For others, that may be like, wow, we're about to go through a big strategic planning process. Maybe we should do some scenarios ahead of time. So I think it will really depend, but our hope is that everybody walks away feeling more empowered with a grounded action item, that is, again, bolstered by the conversations that they had.
Well, yeah, again, I'm already getting even more excited than I already was. I have a couple more questions, and then we'll start to wrap here. I want to go back to individual, like your colleagues said that the bell ringing, what the nervous system.
Yes, yes.
So, we're in this place, and you and I talked about Yuval Noah Harari's book, Nexus, and we're in, myths are stronger than facts, and that we're in information overwhelm. How do you think about, in this age of distraction and information overwhelm, really seeking out the information that is going to settle that nervous system and actually elevate levels of confidence, as opposed to just like being deer in the headlights and just, because that doesn't happen by accident. It takes,
No.
correct me if I'm wrong, like conscious, deliberate seeking of what is most appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah. No, first of all, it's gonna take some courage because and again, some grace for ourselves, things that we don't necessarily learn in business school or,
Mhm, mhm,
because I feel it, I think all of us feel it, it's almost impossible not to feel overwhelmed at some point. One of my favorite quotes in thinking about parsing out the signal from the noise, right? Finding like that more sort of calmer path forward or just, a bit more of the quiet confidence comes from Bob Johansen, who used to run the Institute for the Future. He's written a lot of books on futures and leadership. And he says, the future will reward clarity, but will punish certainty.
mhm,
So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that this is an opportunity for leaders to get very clear about what their organizations stand for, their values, what kind of value they're creating for their customers, for their employees, for the people that they engage with in order to exist. And so those values hopefully are enduring
mhm,
and can help guide when a confusing new technology or advancement comes on the play or a new disruptor. They can pull on those values as a source of strength. They're not starting from zero. And to really try to understand how are they going to continue to invest in their values and grow from their values, even when all this dizzying noise is into play. This is also where the design process is really, really critical. So I co-authored a book called Design a Better Business.
mhm,
And in there are a lot of very helpful tools to help leaders align again on how they're going to move forward, how they're going to experiment forward, even amid incomplete information. One of my absolute favorite tools is called the design criteria. So
mhm,
simple, Al. It basically says, um, what must you, what must something happen? What should we be looking at? What could we be looking at? And what we won't look at, right? And so when a leadership team is exploring, like, what is going to be our new Gen AI policy, or how might we use that effectively, right? Their must column, right? Well, it must support a compassionate work. I'm sort of flexing here, riffing on the moment. It must align with our privacy criteria. It must be something that we have transparency on. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is will help you versus be like this one, that one, this one, and then you're running around. So we can access some of these processes that allow us to be more deliberate, even amid all of the speed that's coming our way.
Uh, wonderful. And I do have one more question, but before that, this is probably somebody, and I don't know if you can see on the screen. Robbie Kelman Baxter says hi, and then follows up, can you offer an example or some examples, but let's just say one example of what you just shared.
Yeah, for sure. And hi, Robbie. It's always good to see you. Robbie's a dear colleague, an incredible thought leader herself, has been really understanding how organizations can create lifelong relationships with their customers. So really thinking differently about business models, which is, again, another great example of a way of trying to think differently about how we ensure we have deep relationships with our customers or clients, again, amid all of the uncertainty. So I'm a huge fan of Robbie's work. But it's probably easiest for me to talk about some of the work that I've been doing in with my students to help them get future ready. So right now, I'm teaching a class called View from the Future, Al. And I want to encourage everyone listening to this can do something like this in their organizations. And the premise of the class is to have conversations with pioneers on the edge of their industries, people that I call are living in the future today in order to explore opportunities of tomorrow. So this gets at this core thesis that I've been trying to, just further in my own work, and we'll talk more about, which is, we can't build a future we haven't first imagined. And sometimes it can be hard to imagine when there's so much overwhelm, right? So one way to imagine is to talk to people that are on the edges that you may not have any exposure to because you didn't even know to ask, to just open up the aperture of how to think about, say, how emerging technologies may be influencing these different fields. And the purpose is not to say, hey, students, this is the field you want to go into, but just to get them to look more expansively, right, at these possibilities. So every week, we're bringing in experts on the future of media. We just had Phil Sanders, who's the CEO of an incredibly cool venture incubator, nonprofit, for-profit accelerator called New Media Ventures, right? That is really going deep into the problem of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Last week, we had the future of fashion and commerce with Jen Cohn, who's the head of communications and marketing for an exciting new AI-fueled company called Daydream, which is foundationally changing the business model of how we shop. Something to really look at. Next week, we're going to be talking about the future of architecture. And what I'm really hoping it's doing for our students is to help them develop the skill set, going back to mindset, to um, open up their imagination a little bit, to rewild their imagination. Here's the thing, Al, that gets me so excited about this work and so hopeful amid, some of the complexity that's happening. We as humans are endowed with two of the greatest gifts to make us future ready. And again, I think this is what Yuval Harari talks about a lot. First of all, we are endowed with an incredible imagination machine that makes us unique from every other species and living system out there, right? We have the ability to imagine. And he talks, of course, about the power of narrative that has allowed us to thrive and grow. We also have the incredible human engine to reflect, to be reflective. So this system, this idea that we can reflect on the past, whether it's our past or we can reflect on things we read or in deep history in order to imagine what psychologists call this ability to prospect. This is the learning engine that I think will continue to supersede any kind of AI. And this is what I hope more learning leaders unlock within their organizations. Systems that allow us to more rapidly learn so that the future doesn't feel like it's happening um, as an adversary to the present, but actually as fuel for the present. So that's my hope.
Gosh, thank you. My final question. What, given everything that you shared, would be your recommendation to young people, say in their teens and early 20s?
Yeah. We always end our classes with this lightning round where we ask about, what is an overlooked skill that you think students can learn, as they're busy getting majors in CS or engineering or economics. And one consistent theme that we hear over and over again is this idea of cultivating curiosity. And I know that sounds a little Pollyanna, Al, particularly when we're like, "Oh, there's that adult again telling us to be curious." But but, curiosity, I think sparks so many important other adjacent skills, wonder, awe, the ability to notice, the ability to feel surprise, right? Like when you're learning something, the ability to develop your own interest. So again, the future's not happening to you. Algorithms are not happening to you. But that also requires space, right? That also requires time for mind wandering, times for reading fiction, time for going on a walk with nature.
Mhm.
So, very practically, even though it feels really antithetical to all the messages coming at us, on a very practical level, I would encourage young people to schedule in, at the very least, a 1 hour walk a week.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe it's broken out. Like, I like the longer time because you get into some deeper, patterns and rhythms. I do all my best thinking when I'm out for a run and my mind is resting and I'm chomping on things, right? But I'm not looking at a screen. So I really, and it may feel forced at first, but I really, really encourage a protection 1 hour a week, right? You can do that and see what happens. Like, and then utilize that reflection. Ooh, how did I feel? Maybe a little uncomfortable, but maybe prospection. I've even had students, because we have students from the business school, which is about a 20-minute walk from where we teach our classes. I just had a student yesterday say, not only do I love your class, I love the 20-minute walk to and from your class because
Mm.
it allows me to integrate, allows me to slow down, allows me to notice different nooks and crannies. So that's my hope. And again, we don't need access to technology to do that. I think it's a very doable thing.
Yeah, I so love that, particularly as the father of, 2 young people in that cohort, just elevating that level of self-awareness and noticing how you're thinking and feeling is just a massive gift to oneself. So, Lisa, any closing comments, and how can people learn more about you and your work?
Oh, thank you, Al. Well, I'm really trying hard to stay very current on LinkedIn. I post a weekly summary of what's going on in our View from the Future class. So you can go back 7 weeks and just learn more about what this class is about and get tapped in. And I try to post resources also that our guests write so that you can follow along as well. So that's probably the most current way to follow me. Coming soon, because I just am so excited to share all this work with more people. I'll be launching a Substack and an updated website that has access to my articles and books. And then one other one, particularly related to the question you asked earlier about how particularly leaders can go back to their organizations. Last month, I published an article in HBR about leadership lessons following the 5-year anniversary of the pandemic, where we talk about these new principles or skills for leaders, like proactively engaging with uncertainty, learning how to make decisions with incomplete information, learning how to communicate clearly with their stakeholders. So that's definitely a great resource, not only for your folks watching this to read, but also to bring in to leadership teams and say, hey, you know what? Let's read this article. What are we doing about this? So I always love putting out things that spark conversations to continue.
Well, Lisa, thank you for being your awesome self and doing what you do. And I am more than looking forward to being with you in Snowbird, Utah next week at Red Thread Research's Elevate event. So again, thank you for sharing. You got a shout out from Mark here that I just shared. So for those who've listened and contributed, thank you. And Lisa, you be well. See you soon. Yeah.
Thanks, Al. You too.